right, I'm not a YouTuber. I'm not an editor. I'm just a, paintball gun guy who has found himself infatuated with this platform here, with the hostile rogue. So there's so little information available online, and the info that is there is kind of quickly deteriorating. As soon as PbNation's gone, like that's it. So I've noticed there's a lot of info out there, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of unfair comparisons to the Defy D3S, which seems to be the most common one. So I just like to highlight the platform a little bit, kind of go through, the operational principle, the history of this gun, of this company, of this marker, and then what that kind of looks like in 2024, and then what it kind of looks like compared to the D3S. Kind of right out of the gate, and I have one in the original packaging here. I'll do an unboxing. Not in this section. I'm just going to kind of talk about it generally here. I guess I'll save this. But, I really, if you're watching this, if you care about guys uploading videos of guns shooting in their backyard, which is a market segment, right? You probably grew up on PbNation, as did I. I started playing maybe 2003, 2004, somewhere in that range. This was like a classic PbNation gun. Like Ego Balas had one, on YouTube. Like all the YouTube guys, had hostile rogues. And I remember it was like kind of a very mysterious rollout. The landscape at the time was there was really only three choices when it came to guns without macro line. That was like it was just kind of burgeoning, right? So you had the Victory, the Bob Long Victory, you had the Lux, and you had the G6R. So of course, Bob Long on the forefront, but then kind of in the midst of all of that, we had the Rogue, which very different form factor than what else was available at the time. They got rid of the macro in a less than conventional way. I remember I thought it had Planet Eclipse, it had Slater vibes, at the time, just with how tight that trigger frame was in the trigger guard. But it just always kind of had a level of mystery about it. I just thought it was the most ag-looking paintball gun of all time, right? So it was just very much like my peak PbNation experience was kind of the Rogue. And then as I've been kind of aggregating all of these guns, my brother and I to shoot in our backyard, I end up finding one of these, and it shoots really good, really, really good. So I've got a couple of them now. I'm trying to aggregate this info, and that's what kind of spawned this video here. So, I just kind of want to give them general first impressions. I'm not going to do an unboxing, but just on the marker itself, you're like, Nick, why does anyone care about the hostile rogue? It's really just aesthetics, in context, right? Point of time, and I think what it looks like. I think those are, as compelling of reasons as anything, especially for the rogue, which I think is very much a period of time, type of marker, right? I'm not sure how I'm going to edit this video together or chunk it together, but I'll do an unboxing at some point. But, the first thing I see, I really did a lot of digging. I went to the California Secretary of State's office and got the business filings and things like that. I just kind of wanted to go through, the life cycle, the life and death of the Rogue here, because it's existed across a couple of permutations. It's, even in, like 2013, 2014, we have the D3S, Air Challenger still around. There's a tale to be woven and told, right? But first impressions, very important. It was a big PbNation gun, in the forums, like in the general clubs chat, there was a we've gone rogue, so it had some amount of following, and that's kind of the context in which it was released. So this gun was kind of came out of nowhere originally was 100 prototypes, which if you were a player, you could petition Hostile Creations Inc. to send you a rogue, and then you would have to report back. So they were all tester guns, and that's kind of where these came in. So there's a couple different variations in there. We're going to go through all of them, but the original rogues, the Hostile Creations rogues, there's two different things. The Hostile Creations rogues were all tester units, and they were designed and made by a company called Hostile Creations Inc. Plucky little startup, lifetime warranty, just kind of starry-eyed, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, right? Cool thing is that Alex Hodge, who you might know, he does a lot, if not all, of the design for HK. He did the SLR goggles, he did like the TFX loader, I think he did the Saber. Alex Hodge, very early in his career, designed the Hostile Rogue, and it actually won a bunch of awards. New Zealand, design awards or whatever. And I support that because I think it's a fantastic looking marker. So it was, conceptualized by Hostile Creations, it was designed by Alex Hodge, and then the manufacturing was contracted out through Air Challenger. Air Challenger, you might remember, because they did all of those like late run, war games guns, like they did like the MG7, like that, the WGP spool valve that was dog shit. They did that, so they're kind of a design for paintball pneumatic design firm for hire, right? They will make a product for you. So it was contracted out through Air Challenger. So they got the first run, a couple of these prototypes, I believe it was 100, that's what I've seen. Some of them actually have, little toe tags, which I'll show you, but there was 100, they were tester units, and it was pretty poorly received. There was a lot of big issues kind of right out of the gate. First and foremost, similar like, the 2011 G6R, no one knew how to make a fucking ASA apparently. They use a 1mm, 2mm OD. They use like basically a solenoid manifold O-ring as the sealing O-ring in the ASA. And if you weren't shooting like an SLP tank, it was going to blow 100% of the time. Just matter of time. Everyone's ASAs were blowing. Two, there was a lot. They were really inconsistent, and then the efficiency was bad. And then I'm a big time ape hater, so the ape electronics boards didn't help. Just lack of early quality control and just some bad design ideas, right? So the ASA was designed poorly. The bolt kit, which I think in practice is a very fantastic shooting bolt. The initial, permutation of it had a lot of issues. There was, we'll get into the design principles and all that stuff of it, but kind of history of the company. There's a lot of issues right out of the gate. So Hostile Creations actually did do a round, not a V2, but like a 1.1. You could mail your gun in, they'd fix the ASA, and they released some like kind of an updated Regulator piston seat, that was domed. So it didn't have as much like stick on the bolt, there wasn't that vacuum, and it helped with some of the inconsistencies. They did updated detents. The detents were, fucked up. It was breaking paint. So it just kind of, it's a beta gun, right? They were having testers do it. And then Hostile Creations, and this is where it gets contested. Hostile Creations went to Air Challenger and said, hey, we can't sell these guns. We need all these fixes. It's inconsistent, blah, blah, blah. We need to do some retooling. We need to fix this drivetrain. We need to fix the ASA. And they said, no. They said, we're gearing up. We got all these bodies. We got all these guns made. We just need to sell it as is. So that kind of led to a split. And I've seen some people contest this part of the story. I've seen kind of two versions of it. But I think this is the way it happened because the company was renamed to Hostile Inc. So like, why would a company, you know what I mean? Like, why would they rename their company to the same name if it wasn't something like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, the gun was shitty, so they reformed the company to sell the shitty ones. I'm like, no, like all those guys were gone. Why would you rename your company the same name? if that was your plan, right? So it was Hostile Creations, and then Air Challenger made a consumer-facing company called Hostile Inc. instead of Hostile Creations Inc. And they shipped the Rogue V2 that had the updated Regulator, updated ASA, but it was still pretty bad. Their service was really bad, and it ended up kind of fizzling out. So I think the total number of guns made, from what I'm seeing, maybe 300, 400, something like that. Less than 1,000, less than 500, just not too many. So it is kind of a drop in the bucket, just a little blip on the kind of paintball timeline here. But that's kind of the history of the company, which is, Hostile Creations didn't want to sell a product that they knew was wonky out of the box, especially at the price point. It was $650 retail in 2011. So this is the same year the G6R came out, which is $1,000 in current year money. So this was, this was a DSR Plus. This was a 180R. You know what I mean? It was a high mid-range gun at the time that it came out, and there was kind of a dangerous power component, which is, the bowl operation is something you're very familiar with from Dangerous Power. But that was kind of the history of it. Kind of just fizzled out from there. So what you're left with after all this time is this marker, a company that's been shut down. But then it comes to the D3S. So I'll go through the engines in a later part of this video, but that's kind of the legacy of the Rogue, which is even though most things are not interchangeable, the D3S ASA fits on the Rogue. Feed necks shipped with the same feed necks. These back caps are the same; they're interchangeable. There's a lot of similarities on the bolt kit here. So, from my understanding, a lot of guys from a Zodin, the D3S was supposed to be in a Zodin gun. It was supposed to be the Zodin spool. And then the Zodin guys laughed over to Defy, and this was the Defy spool, which again they contracted out through Air Challenger, which at that point had done some revisions and came up with the refined version of the Rogue drivetrain. So on all of my Rogues, the best upgrade you can do for a Rogue is to buy a D3S, because you can take the ASA that has no issues with it and the drivetrain that has limited issues but effectively no issues, and you can complete these Rogues. So that's kind of where the Rogue exists in 2024. All of my Rogues have D3S internals and D3S ASA internals, and it really kind of makes it a pretty competent little shooter in 2024 here. There's a couple other things that we'll go through when we go through the engine and look through all that stuff, but that's, from my understanding, kind of the history of the Rogue in the company. And I think the most interesting thing about the Rogue, because every paintball tuber has a video on the D3S. It's a very competent low-end gun, and most of the things people say is that the shot quality is amazing for a $300 gun. I would argue that the shot quality is amazing for any gun. It's one of the best shooting spools outside of maybe the Vanguard Demon, maybe the Regency Chrome, that are out there, which is, if this shot like shit, like, it wouldn't matter. If it shot like a ZR1, it looks cool, but that would kind of be the end of it. But for me, it's worth putting this into, putting the time into this, because these shoot phenomenally, especially with some updates that I've been able to do. So, long story short, Hostile Creations didn't even sell a product. They had these testers, they folded. The inventory they were sitting on that they didn't want to sell was resold by Air Challenger under the name Hostile Inc. All of their socials are now gone. I was able to find a Twitter account, but with no info. It was, kind of a fizzle out at the end there on PbNation as I kind of looked through that as well. So, looking through the history of this platform, it's convoluted, it's sad. It's a guys with a dream. But, the Rogue is not just, it's the same way that, the EMAC and the CS3 are the same gun, right? But not really. and we'll kind of do a side-by-side with the D3S, but there's so much more to this. Like, even though this is solid machine billet aluminum, it's still lighter than the D3S. You know, there's some refinements. You know, it's got an O-ring in the breech. It's, you know, it's like a Shocker SFT. You know, it's got breech sealing O-ring. It runs at a, you know, lower pressure. And most importantly, it doesn't have a clapper solenoid running a spool. It has a fully bespoke, you know, Mac bullet solenoid in a manifold. So the shock quality is 100% different than a D3S. But again, we'll do an unboxing. We'll run through these engines. We'll look at them side by side. But from a, you know, historical context perspective, that's, you know, Hostile and the Rogue, as I've come to understand it. If I'm wrong, please leave a comment. I can issue a retractions video. But that's my general understanding of it. You know, in the next part, we'll go through technical breakdowns and all of that. But this was kind of my forward, my prelude to getting into these guns here. You know, why I think it's a cool platform. I just like anything that's limited. I like anything that's kind of off the beaten path. And I mean, no one holds guns like this anymore, you know, but it's just built for monkey pawn, right? Just a fun little thing here. So I guess the next thing to do is, you know, I'm gonna do a full unboxing, and then we'll go through the drivetrain, some of the things that, you know, community fixes, the differences between the generations, what the updates fixed, the differences between the Hostile creations and the Hostile Rogues, and then kind of wrap it all up with, you know, a D3S comparison. So more on that coming down. All right, so welcome to you know, part 2 of this, which is less conceptual and more stuff driven. What I have here is the original packaging of the original Hostile Creations, you know, V1 Rogue here. So all of them did come with these beautiful carrying cases, very reminiscent of the like Revy and the Fusion Elite packaging, you know, just really nice, Dangerous Power-esque packaging. So as you can see, that's kind of how it was presented. This is a true V1 Rogue, and right out of the gate, I'm sure you're noticing some D3S similarities. You know, same feed neck. Like I said, the ASA is interchangeable. The grips are not, surprisingly, but you know, the bolt kit basically is. But this was kind of your original unboxing experience here. This is as stock a one as I have. It came with a Ape OLED board, which in hindsight doesn't help. Anything that came with an Ape board, you know, the Vapors, you know, Aliens, Dangerous Power, it's, you know, all the screens have been destroyed. They just don't, you know, it's not good for longevity, right? But here is the Hostile Creations Rogue. It's just not a big gun, you know? So, you know, we'll do some weights and stuff, but this is just kind of our unboxing here. I've got some parts in the bottom just because I wanted to show. But another thing that the D3S shares is the world's worst fucking barrel. It has a grand total of like 10 ports on the whole barrel. It's a 2-piece. The whole gun has this kind of bright dip, you know, really kind of textural rough, you know, almost Planet Eclipse-y type of anodizing here, which I don't love. But getting into it, here are the 2 bolt assemblies. It did, you know, I do still have a little Hostile lube. It came with the little Allen keys you need. Doesn't do you any good. Everything's Loctited to hell. But this was the, you know, box and the packaging here on the Rogue, or as complete as I can get it. Now, in terms of the Rogue versus, you know, the D3S, you know, here are both of these here, and you can kind of see them. You know, physical dimensions aside, pretty significant. People always like to say that they're the same gun, or, you know, this is a repackaged Rogue, which, you know, if you paid attention to the beginning, you know, kind of, but things start to differ is on these drive assemblies here. So unfortunately, it's kind of a weird thing because the D3S has a better, more refined drive system than the Rogue. Operationally, they're both the same. Both are, they're both unbalanced. They're not balanced spools. They're both, not even really blow forwards. They're like actuation forwards. Air sear bolt return. Both operating off of basically a switch, but the switch in the Rogue is a Mac bulletnoid, and the switch in the D3S is a big fucking clapper driving a spool, right? So here's our two drive assemblies here, and I'll do my best to kind of go through some of the differences and then the different versions, but that's what we're looking at here. So you'll notice these parts are very similar. So the cool thing about the Rogue and the D3S is that the regulator is built into the bolt assembly, and I think that, I don't want to say it's overlooked, but I think it's a big reason why these things shoot so good. In terms of air turbulence, there's no passages, like it's just the air goes into the bolt kit and it doesn't go anywhere else. Both of these regs just balance your tank output. So if you're having issues with your Rogue, back it out to 0. Every Rogue or D3S issue is just from overpressurization or this reg in some way. So basically what we're seeing here is air is going to, this is seated in here, this is gonna basically come back and let air in, which is going to then push this bolt. There's an O-ring right here. It's gonna push this bolt forward in this can. Once it goes forward enough, it's gonna unseat and all this air is gonna rush in and then out the front. So, dump valve adjacent, basically just a dump valve, I get it. O-ring on there. But the two biggest differences come from, because these front parts are basically the same if you look, and this is a later version. Both of them are gonna, very similar. The only difference here is that this is decoupled and this is coupled. And the reason they went for it this way is because on these, you'll notice these are both flat, and they, I don't want to say, it's like when you have two similar things, you get the friction, not the friction, but you get a little vacuum on there. So this vacuum between these two pieces was causing a lot of inconsistency. So, version 2 was domed, version 3, they just changed the material. And then this regulator assembly, this is in here. There's a little, there's an O-ring in there, and then that's your, your valve for your air. It pops in and out. Same thing on this one. This has been SCM modded, but this one, same thing. There's your piston driving this, letting your air out, right? So this was the version on the Rogue, and it flows a lot higher than the D3S, but it's much more inconsistent. This is a bit less flowable, has a little bit less airflow, which I think in turn kind of is dropping the bolt speed a little bit, but it's much more consistent. So they really fixed a lot of the gremlins with the actual Rogue system. And kind of looking through all the different iterations, if you will, there's quite a few of these different systems. So this was the true V1, which would, it would decouple, and then once it got through here, the air would come around, it would come in through these holes and then out the front. It's just more drag. So on the later versions, as you can see, they just, removed the second O-ring and the second portion. It just completely unseats, which is fine. Why not? I don't have any V2 of the regulator bases, unfortunately, but they were domed. That was their first pass at the inconsistency issue. the second big change that they made was on some of these bolts. So as you can see, the V1s were very Venturi, very domed. Huge rollback, broke paint like crazy. Version 2, much shallower dome. And then these are a couple prototype of, these black ones I hit up teched, and these are prototype teched bolts for the Rogue. So he sent me a couple of these, much larger air holes. That was one of the things Jewett, who was a big kind of Rogue proponent, was always working on, was increasing airflow. So, the Jewett mods on these were using an SCM reg seat with the additional holes for higher flow. That helped a lot. He domed the reg base, but the bolt assembly, it's finicky. You know what I mean? It's not rock solid. It's not what people want in 2024. But the D3S one certainly helped. But the biggest issue across everything was all of these are non-standard metric O-rings. 1.2s and 1.4s, things like that. So as I said, if you're looking at buying a Rogue in this current year, the best thing you can do is put D3S stuff in it, because then at least you can buy an O-ring kit from Captain O-ring or whatever. So really the big thing I wanted to highlight on this video, and I have a donor D3S here, is the difference in firing mechanism here. So here is the Rogue versus the D3S. And as you can see, it took them all of this. Look what they had to do to mimic a fraction of our power. There's no secondary spool in here. This is just a little Mac bullet, right? Same as on the Bob Long stuff on the insides or whatever. Just it's a bespoke Mac bullet, and that's moving your airflow. It's fast, it's responsive, it's accurate. Versus the actual D3S, as you can see, they have a big fucking pancake, driving them a secondary spool that's in here, and that's what's direct, moving your airflow. So it's slow. It shoots like a spider, right? This is cast aluminum, like the edges are sharp. It has that big bulky, rhino skin over top of it. And to give you an idea here, check this out. So, even these are very similar. This is the same on the Rogue. The buttons are a little bit different, but, I see why people say that they're the same, right? There's a lot of things that carry over, but let's see. 1 pound, 8.355 ounces, and this is composite, versus the Rogue, 1 pound. I mean, it's almost half a pound lighter, right? 1 pound, 3 ounces versus 1 pound, almost 9 ounces. So, from a dimension perspective, I mean, look at this thing. It's shorter. The D3S is stretched out a bit more for sure, which is nice. But, look at this, right? No contest. But, they both use dye feed neck threads. So, on my Rogues that I have, that I play with, and that I really enjoy, where did I put that thing? On those, I have, dangerous power feed neck. You can use the ASA, just lines up directly, so you can, use the ASA internals from the D3S. And then the biggest thing And this was what Jewett figured out, which is if you, 47 millimeters from where it screws in, if you drill a hole, you get a little reg exhaust and it breaks the vacuum, ups your cycling speed, lowers your pressure, just, you know, blah, blah, blah. So that's much nicer. The only other thing that I wanted to touch on was in an effort to make these guns better for current year, I got with Jared Bushman of Salty Engineering, now Method Engineering. If you don't know, it's an engineering consortium. It's him and John Chambers, formerly of Dye, the inventor of the Gamma Core. So the inventor of the Salty Bolt and the inventor of the Gamma Core got together and made a new D3S and Rogue bolt. So it is, if you've seen the Adrenaline Idol, it's a Bernoulli bolt. You know, it actually gets tapered in as you go through it where it unseats, and then it uses a Dye M2 tip insert, so it gets rid of the rollback. It's softer on paint, and then it's hard anodized and polished. So if you're watching this and you want one, hit me up. I can get one made as a one-off. It's very expensive, but you know, I have the STL or whatever. I can just make another one. But you know, with that bolt and with a little bit of TLC, so that bolt plus the Jewett kind of blast hole mod here, these are a competitive little shooter, and they do a pretty good job. You know, I think, you know, kind of my closing thoughts here, if you are to compare it to the D3S, it really is the difference between, I don't even want to say an EMAC and a 180, because it's, you know, it's the difference between like a Spider and an Intimidator, right? Like they're both stack tubed, you know, poppet valve markers, but like, you know, this is just, it's over molded plastic, and you know, all the components are bad, but the drivetrain is great, versus this is a really beautiful package, but the drivetrain is wonky. So I think if you do a little bit of the best of both worlds, you've got yourself a really compelling little shooter here in 2024. I will link some shooting videos here in a sec, but that's kind of my wrap up on the history of the Hostile Creations Rogue. I wish I had a little bit more, but you know, thanks to Caustic Customs for the ano on this. I think they were always suffering from not being gloss. I mean, the gloss, these just pop. But that's kind of my history on the Rogue. You know, a couple of companies, a couple of weird products, and the Frankenstein bolt system that's survived, you know, quite a few years after the Rogue, you know, a decade later. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'll see what I can answer. If you have any corrections, let me know, and I can always correct that. But, you know, that's the Rogue.